Welcome, everybody, to our session H7 titled Local Levee Challenges. My name is Jamelyn Trucks. I am with Atkins. I am based in New Orleans, and I have the pleasure of moderating this session today. And we're going to start off, first of all, thank everybody for joining us. I hope you're having a great conference and have been able to participate and join into a number of sessions and learn from the great speakers and participants from this year. And we've got another one for you here. We've got the first presentation today is One Levee's Journey Towards FEMA Certification, a case study in New Orleans. And our presenters are Patti Sexton, who is a water resource engineer with Tetra Tech, and she leads the levee work for the company nationwide and has worked on projects in Washington, Oregon, California, Minnesota, and then, of course, Louisiana and DC. And this has included analysis and design of levee systems, including 2D breach analysis, FEMA levee certification, and Corps of Engineer periodic inspections. She has a Bachelor of Science from Civil Engineering from Virginia Tech. And I love that she included Go Hokies, and her master's in civil and environmental engineering from George Washington University. And as a mother myself, I can't help but include that she is a mother of 3 wonderful children and a gorgeous Russian blue cat, which is wonderful, beautiful, beautiful animals. And additionally, we have Roger, our co-presenter is Roger Caldwell, who is a GIS manager with the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority. And East, and that's of course in New Orleans. And he's worked along the Louisiana, Mississippi Gulf Coast for over 25 years in spatial information and mapping. And that includes the working in the EOC, maintaining the Floodgate status during hurricanes, levee inspection software development, all of those components to making sure we operate and stay safe here in New Orleans. And he's also a licensed FAA drone pilot. And again, he's been blessed to be married for 26 years, has 2 boys and 2 Dachshunds. So we have parents and animal lovers sharing with us today. And with that, look forward to hearing the presentation. And then afterwards, we will have a Q&A session. And please be thinking about questions to ask us, or you can post them during the presentation and we can get to them afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking about the certification of the 40 ARPANT levee system. We won't have the time to cover everything, but we will be able to hit a lot of the highlights. This graphic shows the flood protection system that's in place here around the 40 ARPANT system. The 40 ARPANT system is located crosses in between Orleans Parish and St. Bernard Parish. The red line right along here is what shows the 40 ARPANT system. So this system in total is 24 miles long. It has about 4.5 miles of sheet pile flood wall. That's here along the west end. There's also 7 pump stations. Those are shown with the white square right there. There's also the Violet Canal. That's right here. I'll be talking about that a little bit more later. And there are 5 closure systems along the 40 ARPANT system. The POW for this project was initiated back in 2012. Obviously, our 2-year period has expired, but we have been showing substantial progress, and there hasn't been any remapping that's been initiated. We expect to have the full certification package submitted here within the next couple weeks. The 40 ARPANT system, like I said, that's the red line. It ties into this purple line, which is the HSDR system. The HSDR system, and HSDR is the Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. That's the federal system that was put in place after Katrina by the Corps of Engineers. So it ties into the HSDR system over here on the east end and the IHNC on the west end, which is the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal. Here's a picture that shows typically what the earthen levee looks like. Over here on the east side is the central wetlands. That's what we call the wet side of the levee. And then there's a canal that runs along a lot of it at the toe, and then it protects either open space or residential or commercial areas. And And here's an image of the sheet pile. In many locations, it's a single eye wall sheet pile. In some places, it is made up of a cellular sheet pile configuration that's filled in the middle. And the sheet pile gives us that, that extra height for the freeboard that we need. The geotechnical was a very big part of this whole project. I won't go into any of the analysis that was done, but I did want to point out just the amount of field exploration that was done. You can see there was a combination of both CPTs as well as borings. Some of the borings went down as deep as 100 feet. What we were doing with this number of borings was balancing two set of criteria that was out there. One is just what the Corps has really nationwide covering field exploration, but also some of the enhanced requirements at the HSDR system. So even though this levee isn't part of HSDRs, we did want to address some of those requirements where it was appropriate, and one of them was in looking at the field exploration that we did. Another interesting aspect of this project was the as-builts. There just weren't any. There were a few scattered ones, but not a comprehensive set of as-built drawings. So we coordinated with FEMA quite a bit on what an alternative could be. And what we came up with were what we call verification sheets. And so we developed these verification sheets for each reach of the levee. We divided up into maybe, I guess there's about 6 or 8 different reaches. And we had, you can see the logos of all the different really companies that were, agencies that were part of developing these verification sheets. I had just talked about the geotechnical information. So we're able to use that to show the borings on the levee itself. BFM was our surveyor. They came in and surveyed not only the entire center line, but quite a few cross sections. And we use those cross sections as typical sections for each of the levee reaches. And then FDH, they were our consultant that helped on the sheet pile. They dug test pits to not only verify the depth of the sheet pile, but they also did some electronic testing to be able to identify what the thickness of that sheet pile was. That was an important part of being able to develop what we're standing in our place for as-built, and certainly information that we needed to do the structural analysis. I'll talk a little bit now about the closures along the system. There are 5 different gaps in the levee system where there's closures. 2 of them are along the sheet pile. And so these are stop log structures that are integral with the sheet pile system, and they allow access back and forth onto each side of them. These were pretty straightforward and fairly easy to be able to show the stability of them. The next 2 closures are located adjacent to the shrimp factory. So this is the Violet Canal. I had mentioned that in the overview. So the Violet Canal right here, the alignment of the levee ran along the face of the canal. When we were out there doing the inspection, these photos on the left show, for one, if you look at that top picture, you can see that there's been some erosion that's been occurring right along the face of the canal. There's also a lot of shells and other things that are part of the embankment here that made us question whether that material was competent or not. But a challenge in that was, as you can see, just with the infrastructure that's there, very difficult to think about going in here and doing the borings to test that material. Another complication with what the existing configuration was is that those stop logs that were being used, really they were wood panels, when they were put in place, significantly impacted the ability of the shrimp factory to operate. So there was always this give take with what point that those could be implemented. So the decision was made to realign the 40 ARPANET along the Violet Canal. So you can see here the realignment of the system. So it went back behind the shrimp factory. The shrimp factory itself has, the finished floor is sufficiently high that it's above the BFE. So it was okay to leave that on what would now become the wet side of the flood protection. You can see that there's some homes along here. So there was a significant amount of real estate acquisition that went along with the realignment of the system. So when we were able to realign it, most of this is an earthen levee that came back along here, but we did need 2 closures at each end of this road in order to be able to complete the system. So you can see from this picture, what we have here is sheet pile that was embedded in the earth embankment and came out right to the edge of the road, and then the concrete cutoff walls. And having this concrete walls and sheet pile allows a way for those aluminum stop logs to be seated right here on the road in a watertight fashion to close off the protection. So these were some upgrades that were performed as part of the project. Last closure is along Bayou Road. So you can see Bayou Road is right here, and here's the alignment of the protection system. So this one we weren't able to put a stop log closure in because Bayou Road is an important part of access, not only evacuation, but for first responders to get in and out. So we needed something that still allowed access while closing it off. So what we came up with was a limestone rollover that could be constructed across the road but still allow for vehicles to pass back and forth over it a bit slower than typically, but allowed for passage. Since this was something that required some lead time and some intervention, it was a aspect of the project that we coordinated with FEMA. FEMA was interested in how much time we needed to implement it, which we knew about. PM 63 covers that type of topic. FEMA was also very interested in us identifying specifically what our haul route would be. So you can see what we have here in red is a 1.5 mile haul route that we would need to be able to run in order to get that material on site. We store that limestone here at pump station number 8. So we have this nice facility that we're able to access for the materials to bring them in. And there's enough time in our flood warning to allow for implementation of that rollover. That was the 5th and final of our closure structures. Next aspect that we want to talk about is our inspection process. So back in 2013, when this project was initiated, we had done a walk of the entire system. We had our civil, geotech, hydraulic, as well as the agency out there, and we walked the entire length of the system. There were a few items that were noted that were corrected as part of regular maintenance at that time. But what we also thought at this time, now that we were 7 years later, there had been some delays in our overall schedule because of that reconstruction at the shrimp factory, is that we needed to do an update to the inspection. So rather than simply going out and walking it again, we decided to take advantage of the drone that the Flood Protection Authority had purchased at this point.
So this portion of the project is an updated inspection of about the 24 miles utilizing the drone. The equipment that we used was a DJI Mavic 2 Pro. It's standard controller with a Samsung Galaxy 9 cellular phone, DJI Smart Controller, the Pix4D capture application, and the AirMap application. My next slide offers an overview of what was accomplished using the drone, and it was the 24 miles of planned emissions, which are nadir aerial photos with a minimum of 85% overlap, 4 miles of sheet piling video from each side, which had limited spaces to accomplish them depending on which portion we were at. And the timeline spanned from July 2020 through February 2021. But this actually only comes to roughly 26 days of field flying. This being the first real project utilizing our drone in this agency, we had a few hurdles to overcome. We had 8 hurricanes entering into the Gulf of Mexico. 5 of them had direct impacts to our levee system here in Louisiana. And working remotely with COVID-19 on occasion complicated things a bit. And then we had just a standard day-to-day type rain events, which limited whether we could fly or whether we wanted to get stuck in the levee. So we had to wait for everything to dry out as well. Plus, there's still the consideration that being a new project, we have our regular responsibilities we have to continue to accomplish. So in this next slide, there's a few lessons we have. Initially starting with 4 batteries and 1 drone, there was a maximum of 8 to 12-minute flights. We doubled this by making it 8 batteries, which gave us a much larger span to be out in the field. And then we also noticed that, but when a drone crashes, we only had one drone. We went ahead and got a second as well. We also added a smart controller after running into a problem with our initial controller that comes with it. Because it broke, we were out of the water for a period of time. So we switched and had much more success with the smart controllers, but the battery drained so quickly that we ran into time limitations again of being out in the field. So we had the solution of utilizing a USB portable charger that extended the lifespan to over 8 hours. Then one thing we definitely had to realize was data validation is needed. So when you first turn on the drone while you're out in the field getting ready to and doing all your checks, if there's anything obscuring the camera, whether it's just too tall of grass or uneven ground, the calibration for the camera will fail, and you won't really realize that when you're doing a planned mission, because unless you know to look and synchronize the visual for the camera, which isn't typical when you're doing planned missions, you're not going to find out until you're back in the office after copying all the photos over that all your photos were looking straight forward and not down. So that was definitely a lesson learned. And last, because we received the authorization, we utilized the AirMap app on our phones. And even though we got the authorization from FAA, we ran into a particular area, roughly 600 feet or so, that we just couldn't fly the drone into. It was just inhibited in flight, so that as close as we were, we could get things started, but anywhere in this particular area, the drone just stopped and froze, and we had no idea what was going on there. So after a lot of investigation, and eventually we learned, no, it had nothing to do with the towers nearby or anything like that, but instead it was from an airport that was 2 miles away, even though it did not fall within the restricted FAA flight area. It was an approach for the flight line, which made it a geofenced area, limiting where you could fly. So without going through a process of unlocking that with our drone, it was definitely something new for us to learn. So Patty's going to continue.
Right. Okay. So after we had completed the drone work, we had 2 other aspects of the inspection, the calibration and the validation. So calibration is where we went out into the field with anything that we had identified from the drone footage as a potential deficiency and physically inspected it. And then the validation, and this is where we took 4 different stretches of half-mile reaches where we walked to make sure that what we were seeing from the drone was the same as what we saw out in the field. And once that was complete, we were able to take, there were a few maintenance items that were corrected in order to feed into the certification. A few of the pictures from the drone on the left and then out in the field on the right. So this was probably for me one of the more important places where using that drone was really useful. On this left photo, you can really see this kind of scalloped cutout area right here. So that was flagged as something to validate when we went out in the field. When we went out there, what we saw is that there had been a significant amount of erosion that had occurred. There was a water line that was leaking that was causing some of this that has subsequently been fixed. And as we were walking along here, I thought, based on the kind of the mild slope of the levee as well as the significant overhang, if we were just walking along the top of the system, I'm not sure we would have spotted this. It was actually pretty well disguised. So I thought that was a big win for being able to use the drone, is it really very clearly identified some issues that are a little bit harder to see when you're out there walking along the system. Season is, of course, important. Roger described the timeline over which we did the drone work, and some of that was in the summer. And so you can see that there's some of these areas, this is an example of it, where from the aerial view, you just can't tell if that tree is within the embankment or not. Once we went out in the field, which was in February, so we didn't have that same type of foliage to deal with, you can see that this tree is clearly outside of the embankment, but it's important to know that that the season does change what you can see in your footage. There's several places where we would see something in the footage or the imagery where we just didn't know what it was. And this slash is one of them. You get kind of used to seeing what some of like the lines look like from just traffic, but there would be some things that would stick out like this as anomalies. When our technicians were reviewing this, they actually flagged this as a potential cut in the levee or a retaining wall. When we went out in the field and saw it was actually just some wood that had gotten pressed into the embankment. So really what we took from that is doesn't necessarily mean there's something that's wrong or a problem out there, but there are just some mysteries that need to be field checked after reviewing any kind of footage or imagery. Roger?
So there's two key benefits we had here from the drone inspection side, and the most significant being, one, a very clear picture of the system, of the earth inside to the sheet piling. It offered a clear assessment of what was out there real time during this period, and offered follow-up visuals with our inspection. The second is the photos and the videos that were taken with the drone itself will serve as a baseline from this day forward. And whether it's just as a good reference or giving us the option to do change detection analysis, we've got over half a terabyte of data to go through to utilize for this. So with that being said, if you have any questions, please let us know.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that, and it looks like we've got some interest from the audience today. And so I'm going to take these questions and maybe not take them in exact order, but what makes a little bit more logical sense, which is, and I'll let Patti and Roger choose who's going to respond. But the first one is from Jeff Coop, and the question is, how old is the levee, or does it vary depending on the levee section?
Roger, do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure I'm adequately going to be able to define the history of the 40 ARPANET, because I know it's at least 60 years old, but it's definitely older.
Okay. And then kind of an add-on question, and I think this sounds like is kind of a component of around the shrimp plant. And how was the land acquisition? How were the land acquisitions funded?
Yeah, so we were an interesting part of this project was that we identified an opportunity to go after a CDBG grant,
Okay.
and that was really helpful. It's part of why I explained we started this in 2012 and we're just finishing it up now. That was one of the delays is going after that grant money, because we were able to get a couple $1 million of grant money. So a lot of that came through from the grant as well as some local funds.
Okay. And this kind of gets a little into deep into the FEMA kind of dynamic of this, but and specifically for you, Patti, can you please provide more details about what information is in the verification sheets for FEMA?
Yeah. So
That was kind of right at the beginning of your presentation, I think.
right. So like Roger was saying, this levee is pretty old. Some of it is probably back. I think there were some of those details I saw here and there that were even from the 30s. So that age is the reason why we didn't have very many plans to work with, because a lot of things have happened since the 30s and earlier. Obviously big floods, moves, lots of things that kind of prevented us from being able to keep that record. And so what we did was, to the best that we could, we kind of mirrored what you would put in a typical as-built section. So obviously specs to go with it, but we created a profile of the whole thing. We created typical sections, and then it had detailed sections. Like I thought one part that was really interesting was, how are we going to detail out the sheet piles, right? Like what type are they? Because a lot of them were very old, so they're not like standard manufactured pieces anymore. So we did those details that showed, like for the sheet pile, those specific measurements that you would see on any sheet pile, including the thickness. So we included a lot of that type of information, which I would say is the kind of the structural side of things. The civil would be the plan view, the profiles, cross sections that were typical sections. And then for geotech, one of the early slides, we had a ton of subsurface exploration that was done by Artemin. So we took each of those applicable borings and put them on those sheets so that we could create these verification sheets.
Okay. And if anyone has a follow-up question to the kind of Patti's description and you want additional clarification, just please go ahead and type those follow-up questions so we can address them. And then finally, we have from Perry Turk. So I understand correctly, your closures require human intervention. If so, what did coordination with FEMA look like for that?
Yeah, so if you're in PM 63, it says something, I don't have it in front of me, it's something like things that require human intervention, like sandbags there's different languages, but it's like generally frowned upon is kind of the sense you get from it, and require coordination. So when we saw that we weren't going to be able to put something more permanent in there, for Bayou Road was specifically the one that had the significant piece of human intervention, because we actually need to build up this rollover. The rest of them are just stop logs, so it's just popping some logs in place, so it's pretty easy. But at Bayou Road, it's actually building up that limestone rollover. So we put together some plan sheets of just what this would look like, what that limestone rollover would consist of. And we had some meetings with FEMA about it. And they had a lot of the questions, like I was showing on my slide. They wanted us to put right there on the plans, like where we were going to store all the material. And that was easy because there was a pump station pretty close. So there's, it's enclosed. So we had that spot. One thing that went back and forth quite a bit was the haul route that we would use to bring, like, how are we going to get the materials out there? So FEMA wanted to make sure that it was going to be something that was going to be dry, that we were going to be able to access it the whole time during the flood event. So that was a significant part of it. And then just confirmation on timing. So how long does it take you to put it in? What's your trigger on when to start building it? And based on that trigger, how long do you actually have? So how long are you giving yourselves based on the precipitation events? And then how long do you expect it to take? Those are the main questions.
I know. I mean, that's great information, because it's kind of there's not a checklist that says what do I need and what do I need for that coordination, right? So it's great for someone that's gone through it and experienced it that can provide that level of detail, I think. So, and I'm sure everyone appreciates it. We don't have any other questions, and we're coming up right at the top of the hour. If you do have additional questions you would like either Patti or Roger to address after the next presentation, we will have a little bit of extra time because we only have the 2 presentations for this session today. So, feel free, if you've still got some questions you think of between now and then, go ahead and put them in, and we can address them after the next presentation. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce our next 2 speakers. The next presentation is Making Lumberton Resilient by Putting Floodgates in the Levee System. And our quick overview is the city of Lumberton was flooded with the levee protected zone twice in a 2-year period, from Hurricane Matthew and Florence. And the point of vulnerability was the opening and embankment where I-95 crosses over VFW Road and an active CSX railroad line. And, this presentation is going to talk a little bit about finding a more permanent solution for, and I like the quotations, plugging the hole in the levee system over against the current sandbagging protocol that had been, it's a desire of the city. So we'll certainly have Mr. Amit Sachan is a project director with Atkins in the public and private business unit in Raleigh. And he's has over 19 years of a career spanning academics and private sectors. And he's served in engineering and business development roles, and his project experience includes riverine modeling, stream restoration, stormwater capital improvement, flood control, erosion control, roadway drainage projects for municipal, state, and federal clients. Originally from India, Amit has received an undergrad from IIT Bombay, and he has graduate degrees from Virginia Tech and NC State. Seems like we've got a bit of a Virginia Tech crew today. That's great to see. And he's also been the board of directors for the American Council of Engineering Companies, and he's the former chairman for North Carolina Association of Floodplain Managers. And I know certainly we were hoping to have this event in Raleigh this year, and that's hopefully we'll see that in the future. But we were just talking about his son earlier, but he enjoys volunteering for STEM education programs such as Math Counts in Future Cities, and he lives in Cary, North Carolina, with his wife and 2 children. And we also have, in addition to Amit, we have Rob Armstrong, and he is in. It wasn't in the formal guide, but we do have a bio for him, so I'm going to quickly give you all a little background. Rob is a professional engineer. He earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from North Carolina State University in 1994. And he's a licensed North and South Carolina, and also holds certification in wastewater treatment, sanitary sewer collection systems, water distribution systems, and well water treatment. And he has served as the director of public works for the city of Lumberton since 2006, where he's responsible for developing long-range public works related capital plans and oversees street and drainage operations, water and sewer operations, and fleet maintenance operations. And prior to joining the city of Lumberton, he served 5 years as the city engineer for the city of Whiteville. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. And if you have questions, please make sure you put those into the chat box, and we'll address them after the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this project, we'll talk about regional resilience efforts in North Carolina, and then focus on a Floodgate project that we're doing in city of Lumberton. So North Carolina has had its fair share of hurricane events in the recent past. A lot of big events, big storms passed through this area, and it ended up flooding communities and causing a lot of damage and destruction in a lot of communities. So there has been a statewide effort, from a multi-agency effort, to plan for these events and making our state more resilient. So we'll again talk about City of Lumberton Floodgate project. So for that, I would ask Mr. Rob Armstrong, who's the Public Works Director, to give a background of the community and how this project came about. So Rob.
Thanks, Amit. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for letting me share some information with you about our projects. This is one of many projects that we'd like to kind of briefly go over today. But first, I'd like to give you some history of the city of Lumberton. We're situated in the southeastern North Carolina area in Robinson County. It's kind of a coastal plain area. The Lumberton was developed and centered along the Lumber River, which it used for commerce back in the early 1800s. Because we sit along a river, most of the city today sits in a floodplain. There is a portion up on a high bluff. That's a very small portion of our city. The rest of us are in the flood-prone areas, and that's evident by looking at this floodplain map. You can see the majority of the surrounding area is low-lying. we have a long history of flooding here. So in the 1970s, plans were developed to try to prevent some of the flooding on the low side, the south and west side of Lumberton, by building a earthen dike. This was a United States Department of Agriculture Soil Conservation Service project. That project was constructed in the 1970s. Here's a kind of an overall plan view of the early concept of that. The earthen project had performed well for many years after it was built, but recent years it has been challenged by extreme storms, namely Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence. So we were able to see some of the weak points in this overall flood prevention concept, and we have started taking steps to make these areas flood-proof or make the levee more resilient to flooding. You can see a picture here of the earthen structure. This is one of the areas that causes great problems here. You can see a railroad track that goes under the Interstate 95. That is where floodwaters rushed in during Hurricane Matthew. You can tell by this graphic that we had an intense rainfall during Hurricane Matthew. In addition, the river was already at flood stage or near flood stage before Hurricane Matthew actually hit landfall. So the high river, along with the extreme rain that we got, sent us into record flooding along the Lumber River, record for 2016. Here's a picture of some of the flooding that happened along the river. This is actually where water penetrated the I-95 CSX railroad opening, we'll call it. Our plans had always been to protect this area with temporary sandbags in case of major events. And this storm, Hurricane Matthew and Hurricane Florence, showed us that that was not a good long-term flood resilient program. So here we enter after Hurricane Matthew 2017, we started planning and developing a permanent floodgate for this particular area of the levee, along with a lot of other projects to help us survive these major floods that not only were associated with the levee, but also our water production and water distribution system, as well as our sanitary sewer collection system.
So the city started planning for these events and they stepped back and looked at community as a whole and also a region, and then see what can be done to prevent the community from getting hit that hard, and even if they're hit hard, how to get back on their feet as quickly as possible. So the planning effort was started in 2017, which included a lot of different stakeholders, including North Carolina State University and a lot of other agencies. So several different alternatives were considered. A lot of projects were considered. This is just a small list of projects that were considered during that planning study. There was Lumber River Channel widening was considered, I-95 elevation and widening, Lumberton Loop Greenway project, Laura Stream Restoration project, acquisition and buyout type projects, drainage improvement studies and projects, and then Floodgate was one of the important projects, but again, just one of the several projects that were decided to be done to make this area more flood resilient. So during planning phase, cost benefit analysis was done to make sure that the costs of these projects are considered and then also what kind of benefits they provide. And that was done not just for funding reason, but also in order to prioritize these projects on which order they have to be done. These cost-benefit analysis and planning studies were eventually used for during grant funding stage, where the city went to several different agencies to request funds to do these projects. There were a lot of collaboration and partnerships were formed to navigate the city through various issues, including permitting, and then more importantly, of the funding for these projects. So city did a lot of meetings, a lot of outreach effort to make sure that all the stakeholders are brought on the same page. The local residents and businesses, of course, they're the ones directly impacted by these events. CSX Railroad Transportation, Golden Leaf, North Carolina Department of Transportation, major stakeholder, North Carolina Emergency Management, another key stakeholder, FEMA, FHWA, North Carolina Office of Recovery Resiliency, Army Corps of Engineers, and then, of course, the congressional and legislative representatives. So all of these stakeholders were informed and then were brought to the table to discuss these projects.
Amit, soon after Hurricane Matthew and our planning efforts had gotten going, we were hit with another hurricane, a major hurricane, Hurricane Florence in 2018. This was even worse than Hurricane Matthew. We set yet new river record flooding levels on the Lumber River. We did have a chance to try to prepare for this one based on our lessons from Hurricane Matthew. So the flooding in some cases was not quite as bad, but overall the city was hit pretty hard with flooding again. Some of these pictures show the same areas that entered through our levee under the railroad, under the I-95 or the railroad track, which reinforced our concept of having a permanent floodgate here, because any kind of structure that we were able to hastily build out of earth and sandbags just did not withstand. And you see the remnants of that here in this slide. Here's a photo of what has happened with the flooding in the protected area of the levee. So we want to prevent this by implementing not only the Floodgate project, but improving other areas in town too, to make them more resilient. So 2019, we were challenged again by Hurricane Dorian. This is a photo of the barrier that we placed temporarily at the railroad opening. This is a HESCO product. It's a proprietary product that's designed to be put in hastily. It's earthen filled. It has a proven track record. This was funded by the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. They bought the material for this, and our public works crew worked through the night ahead of Dorian to put this in place. This earthen structure was never really challenged by the floodwaters of Dorian. Fortunately, Dorian made a turn away from us at the last minute, and the floodwaters never really approached this. But this barrier remains in place for the most part to give us some protection, short-term protection, while our floodgate is in design. Our permanent floodgate is in design and in construction. So the conceptual plan of our permanent floodgate here it can be visualized in this short video that we're going to show you. We're going to zoom in here to the southeastern North Carolina where we are in the coastal plain. You can kind of see our flat terrain. We'll pull into Romsden County, which all is in the coastal plain, and specifically Lumberton, where we have a convergence of the Lumber River and several other sub-basin of drainage coming into this one focal point here. And the low spot is this VFW road, CSX Railroad under I-95. Again, the original concept was to put earthen sandbags here. Our proposal is to build a permanent floodgate that can be closed in the event of a flood. So you can see with everything on the protected side of the levee is in a floodplain without the floodgate there. Certainly on the unprotected side, not only is it in a floodway, but a good portion of this is in a floodway, not just a floodplain. Here is our concept of the protected floodgate structure at the CSX railroad crossing. So once this floodgate is implemented, there's still other challenges to the levee system during extreme storms, but by far, this is the critical link to make it more flood resistant. And to get to this point where we're in the design phase finally of this took a lot of coordination between some major stakeholders. And you can see that we've had several meetings. This is one before COVID has even set us back. We've had in-person meetings. Now we're having virtual meetings. Because there's so many stakeholders and so many elements to design around, there were some setbacks where we started design concept on the east side of 95. But once we got into a DOT and federal highway discussion about their project to widen and elevate I-95 to make it more flood resilient, we had to move this concept to the west side of I-95. So it had a lot of evolution. We believe that the stakeholder coordination is critical, remains critical. We've had a lot of good input from the private landowners around and the corporate CSX folks who are a key player in this whole concept of the floodgate.
So we decided to do a very detailed, thorough hydrology and hydraulic modeling of this area to make sure that we understand how much water is coming, what the timing component is, and how this impacts everything downstream. It has to be on a watershed level, on a regional level. So again, a very detailed HEC-HMS model, which was a rainfall runoff model, was developed, and it was calibrated using gauge data along Lumber River, which was obtained by different agencies, including USGS. So this graphic shows the calibration results that we obtained. So you can see there was a very close match between the model results and then the storm that it was calibrated to, which was Hurricane Florence in this case. Both hydrographs pretty much match with each other. And it was verified using information for Hurricane Matthew. Again, a very close match, which gives us a lot of confidence in our model. We think that model predicts the discharge and the timing very, very well. So that brings us to hydraulics. So we use this information into hydraulic model. In this case, hydraulic model was done using Army Corps of Engineers HEC-RAS model, two-dimensional model. It was mesh. This just shows the mesh for the whole area, which was evaluated. And again, it was calibrated using high water marks, which the city and other agencies and CEM and Army Corps of Engineers and USGS and others have collected. So so this shows how the high water mark compares with the model results. There were some deviations in some locations, but overall, it was a pretty good match with the high water marks during Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthew. So how did it impact the floodplain for Lumber River? So this graphic shows the floodplains for before the Floodgate project. So as you can see, the red line is the levee system that exists, and everything behind it is flooded if the floodgate isn't in place, and that's during 100-year. That area isn't flooded anymore if that floodgate is put in place. So model confirmed that, and then we designed the gate. We would design the gate based on those elevations. So what are the challenges that we face or will be facing going forward? Right now we are moving on to the final design phase, and the city is being proactive in terms of anticipating challenges. The biggest challenge would be one of the is dam safety issues. The floodgate system is considered as a dam by state regulations, so it has to be permitted as such. So we are right now coming up with ways to make sure that the final design matches dam safety regulations. And this is a first of its kind project in North Carolina. We haven't had a floodgate project in North Carolina, so it's a new thing for everybody involved. So we are working through those challenges. Now, the other thing that city wants to do is apply for certification for the levee system. This floodgate is part of the levee system, which was put in place in 1970. So with the floodgate in place, they want to make sure that they can obtain certification for this levee system. And then other challenges, new floodplain maps would have to be created once the floodgate is put in place. And then there is I-95 widening and elevation projects that's happening right now. This floodgate project would happen around the same time. So we have to think about construction phasing and how both projects tie to each other. So there is a lot of coordination with NCDOT and FHWA and other agencies, CSX, Railroad as well. This project, as you can imagine, has a lot of interest from all of the stakeholders, with high media visibility. Everything that's done on this project kind of shows up in the media. So it has to be, need to make sure that everybody is informed properly, and all those information is spread to the right people at the right time. And then project funding on this project the project is planned, designed, and constructed using 3 different sources: Golden Leaf, or CDBG-DR, and EDA funding. So all those agencies we're making sure that all of the requirements are being met and followed during this design and construction phase. So those are challenges and opportunities. There are a few projects that have been constructed, but that's just few of them. The photos show some water treatment plant berm project that was constructed. There has been few acquisitions and buyouts as well, just to designate them as flood storage areas. And then there are the sewer pump station flood mitigation project and well flood mitigation projects that have been completed. But again, those are few of the projects from a long list of projects that are being done in City of Lumberton. So takeaway from this presentation would be, it's really important that resiliency is viewed in a regional level. One project cannot solve all the problems. We have to step back and look at resiliency on a regional level, how other areas are impacted by projects, and we have to do several projects to make sure that flooding is is contained, and then communities can get back on their feet as quickly as possible. It's important that proper planning is done, and that's to prioritize projects, and also making sure that funding is available to do these projects when the time comes. It's very important that all the stakeholders are brought on board ahead of time, and then all the potential issues are brought up and discussed with them, and they can be your partners in resolving some of these issues and helping you navigate these potential problems. So it's very important to form partnerships and then educate its stakeholders and keep bring them to the same page. Well, with that, we'll open it up for questions. We'll take any questions you may have. You all can reach out to us if there are further questions after this presentation as well. So thank you so much for your time. That's it.
See y'all. Thank you.
Welcome back, I'm here. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. Thank you to Amit and Rob for that great presentation. And we do have a few questions that have come across, and I'll go ahead and read them out, and then we'll have either Amit or Rob address them. We'll start with the first one, which is, how are you ever able to get the railroad to get on board with this? And how do they get notified when the floodgate gets deployed during a flood? And how frequently is the floodgate tested? And what is the coordination process with the road? And some of that may not have occurred yet, but in quite a few questions there, but I guess address what you could.
Sure. Rob, do you want me to take it?
Sure, you can take a stab at that.
Okay. So we've been really fortunate in this project. City Railroad has been really cooperating, and they have been involved with this project ever since we started planning it. I mean, matter of fact is the whole community is being impacted by this flooding through this opening, not just the residents and local businesses downstream, but also the railroad. Railroad was out of operation for several days, if not weeks. So they are impacted by the flooding as much as everybody else. So they want to see this taken care of and this project constructed. So they've been very cooperative. But in terms of the processes in place, we're talking to them all along. They were involved in the planning side. They were involved in when we had the conceptual plan. They came to the meeting. And when we had some kind of preliminary design, we shared it with them. They shared their comments. But also there is an agreement that's going to be placed between the city and CSX in terms of what the roles and responsibilities would be. And then there'll also be an operation plan that'll be prepared once the floodgate is constructed, and they'll determine how the CSX railroad would be notified and how soon would the gate be closed and what CSX railroad would have to do if the gate were to close. So all of that would have to be put in paper and agreed upon between all parties, and so that everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same expectations. So that's pretty much it. Rob, do you want to add to it?
That pretty much sums it up, Amit. The railroad has been a very large involvement in this from the get-go, and we appreciate that. And we feel like it'll be something that will continue to be a relationship with the railroad as the project evolves.
Great, and we shared within our group that's a question that seems to be pretty prevalent for anytime there's a railroads involved. So it's great to see that there is that coordination, because that doesn't seem to be typical. And based on my past experience and the other presenters in this group today, so that is good to hear. The next question was, Was a permanent wall put across VSW Road? That may just be more of a clarification from the presentation.
Rob, do you want me to take it or you? Okay.
Yes. So the plan is to permanently close VFW Road by putting a wall across the what used to be the road. We will have an access road behind or on the protected side of the levee there to do our maintenance on the floodgate system, but the road will be closed permanently.
Okay. And kind of a follow-on, I think, to this one is, will the floodgate require sandbags at the intersection with the railroad tracks?
No, sandbags are history. Amit can probably expand on that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, sandbags are just a temporary measure until the permanent floodgate system is placed. So again, that's temporary, and they'll be removed and won't be deployed once the floodgate system is constructed.
And someone, Perry Turk, wanted to find out if we could repeat the project funding sources.
Rob, do you want to? I mean,
Sure.
do you want me to?
I can take that. So the project funding sources are the North Carolina Golden Leaf Foundation. That's a foundation that receives money from the tobacco buyout program that happened a few decades ago. And the other source is the CDBG Disaster Relief Fund. That's federal money that's been passed down to the state. We applied for that through a competitive grant process and received money there. And then the last source, probably one of the biggest contributors, is the United States Economic Development Administration. So the Golden Leaf Foundation was about $1.1 million. Disaster relief was about $1 million, and then the balance of this project is being made up by United States EDA.
That's some creative funding collaboration there. That's great to see. And kind of being creative and getting to what, to get what you need and to get this project in place. The other question here we have, and this is a compliment. I think this is a great compliment. This is by Paul Anderson. This has been one of the more interesting projects I've seen this week. And unless I missed it, what was the extent of FEMA's involvement been in this project? It doesn't sound like they're a funding source, so they've, aside from maybe the certification of the levees in the future and the remapping potentially.
So specifically, FEMA was not involved in the Floodgate project. While FEMA was a major player in our recovery from both of these floods, one of the projects that they opt out of participating in early on was the Floodgate, and their stance is that there was no permanent floodgate there to begin with to be damaged, so they wouldn't participate monetarily in the replacement or the construction of this new permanent floodgate. And so far, they really haven't been involved as part of a permitting process of it, but I'll let Amit kind of expand on that if he wants to.
Sure. Just to add to it, we coordinated with them regarding the floodplain compliance aspect, and they were very responsive and very helpful in that regard. And then also North Carolina Emergency Management has been providing guidance and their input on the project, which is a CTP for FEMA. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that is the bulk of the questions here. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add or wants to kind of step back to our first presentation today. But at this time, I don't see any additional questions. So I want to just thank our presenters today, Patti, Rob, Amit, Roger. Thank you so much for and staying on through the end of this presentation as well, just in case we had any additional questions. But appreciate the time and effort you put into presenting, putting together these presentations and being here today. And for those of you that are with us, thank you for joining us and engaging with your questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.